activating materials and surface, the blur, a sense of beauty with a sinister edge. Within this fragile assembly of language, he delves into the sensations of absence, sexuality, waiting, and ritual. William has exhibited nationally and internationally and is the recipient of prestigious awards such as the Manchester Contemporary Art Fund. In the pipeline, William has many exciting projects in cities such as Vienna and Paris. If you wouldn't mind taking away, Will.
Brilliant. I'm just going to mute everyone and then I'll unmute you, Will, and just yeah, just mute
Sure.
all. Okay, so yeah, it should be good for you to go now. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for everyone who's tuned in tonight, and really thank you to Sam and Susie for inviting me to speak. Just going to really start tonight a little bit with where things began, and that was about 2010 when I think I first felt I made a work that I felt I could exhibit, and I wasn't too couldn't find endless faults with it. That I don't mind finding faults with works, but just generally I found it was a work that I felt I could put out there, that I wanted to use as a platform to begin my, I would say, is kind of developing my language with materials, particularly out of a kind of performative background. I would say that everything that has kind of gone on from this point in 2010 with this work that I've got the image up called Breaking a Line is has always a sort of element of intermittency, temporality, and a sort of flux. And this all very much is coming from, I think, I only kind of realized this sort of a bit later on thinking about this, but kind of like a locality with London, growing up in London, seeing the constant kind of shifting cognition, sounds, kind of being mesmerized and kind of like by the kind of noise of the city, and also the kind of transience being sort of funneled around, as well as seeing transience on a more global level, friends coming, friends going, as a kind of hub. So I'm just going to play a short clip from this piece, which is called Breaking a Line. It's a collection of flickering fluorescent light bulbs. I'm sorry that there's no sound. We've tried to resolve this issue earlier, and I've looked at that, and it's not been possible to sort out. But you can go to the Vimeo link on my name, William Mackrell, Breaking a Line, to hear the piece with sound. But yeah, basically it's a collection of flickering fluorescent lights, and I started collecting them because I was actually looking for a fluorescent light to replace in my studio, and I found one in the street that I thought would do, and ended up taking it back to the studio, putting it in, and just being kind of mesmerized a bit by it. And I started thinking about how the fluorescent light in its most reduced minimal form could kind of come to be a language for encapsulating all those feelings and all this stuff I'm talking about temporality, particularly the shift of space, buildings being knocked down, studios being lost, which I'm sure many of you people here tonight have experienced, and just the general sense of the kind of uncertain and nervousness that is sort of created by the flux of any big city. And so I kind of thought, well, the first proposition and problem would be, how do you think about this fluorescent light in relation to the master of fluorescent lights? And that's when I wanted to sort of bring in Dan Flavin, of course. I kind of wanted to think about how you work, how anybody begins to work with a material which has been so kind of like dominated by that kind of history and minimalism. But I wanted to think also a bit about not just the material aspect of Dan Flavin's fluorescent light bulbs, but also the kind of his background as a kind of before becoming an artist, he was practicing actually to be a priest, and I kind of think there's this kind of religious, devotional aspect to how he presents and considers his light pieces, and I think his way with presenting light was immediately I immediately thought, well, how can I add something which he hasn't really already accomplished? So I was kind of thinking a lot about his writings, and I went into his writings, and there was a line which is actually the title of this presentation tonight, which is "The lights will go out as they should, no doubt." And he wrote that in one of his lines about his own works, to the point of that idea of fragility and where and when they break down or can no longer function. And I kind of felt that moment with the dying of the light bulb in Breaking a Line represented a kind of release and a way out of Dan Flavin's language, then think about how that could create a new sort of landscape of considering that material, and as well as thinking about thinking about that kind of language of Dan Flavin and the light bulb. I also feel like I've only kind of got to learn recently that a lot more kind of childhood experiences kind of fed into that flickering light feeling. And it is a shame that we couldn't hear the sound, because it is that kind of pinging of the bulb and the kind of delicate notes and rhythms that are so much part of that piece. And yeah, I kind of wanted to show this picture because a big part of my childhood was many memorable breakdowns with my dad's Beatle, which included a few times going down to see my aunts in Plymouth, and the same AA driver picking us up around the halfway point, going there to Plymouth and then coming back to London. And it's this sort of sensations that you recall in memories, a bit like things with taste and senses that kind of feed as well into this sense of the passing of traffic and that airflow and breath, and the cars going past you, the vacuum created when your car door sort of shakes. And I feel like, as much as the canon of art history has been considered in how I kind of try to rigorously present and kind of develop the work to the point that I'm kind of trying to evolve that fluorescent light, so much of these things are kind of come in through just a sort of subconscious. So I kind of wanted to make that point now at the beginning, because I also feel like, especially for students who may be tuning into this tonight, I always feel it's important to go as much inside one's own experiences and intuition as much as many of the dogmas that you will have heard at your art colleges, and every art school has as well its own kind of principle dogma, that I think is a good thing, but it's also a language which, once you've learned, important to break and keep it at bay, and not to allow theory and a trend to kind of overpower your own personal experiences. So I wanted to think about how I could move on with that flickering fluorescent light and develop it a bit. And I also wanted to think about a little bit what I was saying about the breakdown, and that sense that the tremor of the light bulb, the feeling of it, and the pulsation of the light bulb, how that created that sensation in the body. And so I developed these vitrines that encase the light bulb, but the person lying on the top could feel the pulsation through the diaphragm and through the body. And all I asked them to do was to exhale this feeling as a kind of breath, as a sound. And again, I'm going to show you a clip from this work. And unfortunately, again, we haven't got sound, but at least maybe I can hear it, but you can't. But I'd like you to get hopefully a sensation of the installation. Yeah, so just going back to the images, one moment. I wanted to think about some of the other influences that come into my work in terms of how the body, light, and installation are created. And I'd like to reference Alexander McQueen's catwalks, and in particularly the sort of detail of installation that he always went to in creating situations that obviously not only were they epic spectacles, but they critiqued the environment in which they were presented. And in this instance, the models that came through into this installation came into a two-way mirrored glass room where the audience could see them and they couldn't see the audience, with a finale of the entire centerpiece collapsing, and a lady who wouldn't be expected to be necessarily a model was lying on this couch with butterflies and a ventilator. And it's a very, very, very powerful installation. And I would say to anyone definitely to check it out, especially even on the documentary on the Queen that was made about a year or two ago. And I just wanted to mention that because I think that in a way, moving outside the kind of fine art situation, I wanted to sort of mention about how many sort of references do come into my work, or feelings that come into my work through passion, and also I'll be talking a little bit later about some of the music elements. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that one up, and this is a close-up image of the models appearing to the audience. Yeah, I mean, definitely I would say, of course, that looking at those, they're very different to the kind of clinical, minimal, almost kind of medical situation of these works. But I wanted to kind of show you bit by bit, especially people who don't know my work, where this is now heading into the next piece I'd like to talk about, which is called Breaking a Dance. This was when I first attempted to use the breaking light bulbs as lighting, as intermittent kind of lighting for an installation where I dressed up in my overalls entirely in penny coins and tried to dance in the money for as long as I was able to stand up. And I think that this installation shot at Silvertown in 2017 shows what I like about this particular presentation of this work was the backdrop of Canary Wharf and the City of London, because of the shimmering power of financial capital. And I was thinking about them again, kind of going back to how with the breaking light bulbs, there was this kind of loss of studio space, or the light bulb kind of referencing, in a sense, this kind of urbanization change for me with spaces, and particularly when the breaking line is almost always exhibited in a space that is undergoing a sense of change. So I wanted to kind of connect those two pieces in terms of how I was sort of thinking about the desire and kind of yeah, the desire and kind of feeling of trying to wear this money. And I just want to play a quick clip from the video, which is 6 minutes, but don't worry, I won't do all of that. Sorry, one moment. Sorry, as you can see, this is my first attempt at, okay. Okay, breaking. I'm hoping there's sound this time. So, um, so yeah, it's it's a piece where I started trying to think about how these systems are working, how we hold them, how we have to negotiate them, particularly now with the current situation. It's a piece that I already felt about with increasing studio rents, with increasing juggling bills, trying to make things work. But yeah, I just thought that this is a timely piece maybe now to show with how we are all trying to kind of negotiate this situation as well as try to obviously negotiate the anxiety and concerns of loved ones and friends, but also survival of trying to make work in London, which seems to be quite doesn't seem to be getting easier. But I think that's that. Um, I kind of wanted to also mention kind of again influences, and I would feel that one of the pieces again coming into this that came back later, kind of seeing it, was very much Pink Floyd's Money piece, which I just kind of felt like was why isn't it showing at big screen?
You just click the key
Um,
doing that, expanding.
I just yeah, I just felt like this kind of sort of again that kind of reference to music videos, to how we think about the allure of capital, to the pain of capital, is kind of always somewhat there. Um, and yeah, I just I just thought that we should see that because I think it's important. The next thing I wanted to kind of mention after that was, I mean, a little bit about me again, kind of going back to the Dan Flavin thing earlier. I mentioned about him being a priest or having a kind of religious devotional aspect of these light pieces was, I mean, kind of growing up, it was, my parents are Catholic, and not really too heavily pushing me into any kind of religious conformism with what they wanted and things, but I kind of did go ritually to church on Sundays until I was no longer living at home. But I kind of felt like that kind of repetition of the behaviors of religion, or what I might say, the kind of repeated action of that, as I feel, has always kind of somehow etched itself, never lost, in the work. And I mean that from not just kind of talking about light, but also about this kind of iconography of say covering myself in the coins, or the kind of scale of the lighting, or space. Kind of, I feel, has always had a sort of element of connection. And at the same time, I was curious because, at the same time, it was kind of interesting because my father was a professor of French history, and as well as going to church, he was very good at horse racing gambling. He kind of followed a tipster, and I was always interested in watching the racing with him. And I think that kind of element again enters into the work, and then just in relation to that kind of idea of breaking a dance, I really wanted to show this clip from Walthamstow Dogs, which was a place I used to go to as a child on Saturday nights. And I was really interested going back to the idea of this sort of language of financial power and how we talk about it through the body. And one of the people that I think often has kind of been ignored through this is the Tic Tac Man. So I wanted to show a quick clip about who that is. That's basically a person who does sign language in relation to the fluctuation of odds and betting. So I'm just going to show a very quick clip about that.
I work for a bookmaker. What's the other side of the track? But his other tic tac will read me. That's the time if he'll go up, go down. Have bets with me. If he has a liability of a certain dog, I then put the bets on for him using hand signals for bookmakers. It's the one, the 4 dog, 10, the 5 dog, 7 the 2 the box. I'm Jim Davis. I'm an independent bookmaker in a popular enclosure at Walthamstow Greyhound Stadium. My job is to give the punters different prices on the board tonight.
So yeah, don't want to go on too much for that because I know we need to get on with other things. But yeah, just wanted to give you a sense of where I'm coming from with like those pieces like Breaking a Dance, and to kind of think about how I think about these languages of interaction, of exchange, and how often they don't necessarily come from a kind of art situation background. Okay, so moving on to the next thing. Yeah, this is an image from a Tic Tac Man in the early 60s. I think it's got very interesting kind of caught in that moment with that pose. The next piece I really wanted to speak about was in kind of taking it a little bit more in a subdued way, but I wanted to talk a bit about my sleep works, which are made on carbon paper, which I stitch together, and I sleep on the carbon paper. I was thinking a lot about how sleep um, is something that has kind of become eroded through kind of technological systems. I mean, I think we can all obviously turn them off and you can go to sleep. But what I mean is a kind of a sense of the kind of global impact that connectivity creates, and how that kind of interrupts our threshold of sleep. I'm also thinking a lot about how distraction enters into our sort of subconscious. And so I really wanted to kind of connect how we think about financial power, sleep, and the traces of that. And I think this felt like a way for me to put out there what I would call a receipt of my sleep. So as I said before, this is 25 sheets of A3 carbon paper stitched together, which I then put in my bed and sleep on it. I tried to do it the first time with the mattress, but then ended up sleeping on a board to get a bit more of the actual marks. And I've made them as pillow pieces as well, because I think as well kind of about the neurons and brain in these works, kind of also trying to hold that shape in the paper. And I really like the carbon paper, obviously because of the effect that the trace creates, but also really because of that sensation of invoicing, like invoicing the brain, the head, a night's sleep. And I just felt like that's something I wanted to connect in those pieces. Moving on from that, I wanted to talk about those kind of subconscious or unconscious spaces that we often find ourselves in. And this is a work called Hold Up, which I first made in 2016 and is still growing. It's a collection of all the times that I have spent on hold, trying to get through to companies, generally customer service companies. Sometimes that has been a bank, a council, car insurance, a bookmaker, anyone who I've been trying to resolve a problem with. And I have recorded from my phone all of the music that is played during these situations. And I've tried to form in a way the greatest hits of wasted time that I've experienced since starting the project, and it's now grown into about 40 or 50 tracks. I guess I've kind of wanted to connect this work to sleep and the other works before that in this order, because I wanted to think as well about that kind of moment within the phone call where you are kind of, I would say, suspended in a non-place. You don't know how long it will be, who you might talk to. And I'm interested as well in that kind of wave and sort of watery sound that comes often with the subjection of usually pretty awful, poor quality pop music. And I wanted to think about that kind of sense of disconnection from that space. So in one room is presented the record player and the records, and in the other space is a small hole in the wall where the sound, very whispery, like comes out of. It's kind of low down to the floor. I kind of did this intentionally because I wanted the work to have a feeling of almost being kind of confessional. You kind of have to crouch down and listen carefully, and it's it's a work that is going to continue. I think I'm going to have to put an end to it at some point soon because I wanted to have a feeling of how it has to evolve, because I never like things to kind of just be content about what they've become. So one of the projects I'm currently working on right now is working with a band to play the whole music collection in a kind of a style like the Top of the Pops, so kind of in a way, the way that when musicians used to play on Top of the Pops, they actually never played. They always mimicked the music to a recording. And this is just a close up of some of the tracks that I created, including Trainline Company, which is often pretty useless. But yeah, kind of wanted to move on now to some of my projects that carry on this kind of power, language, behavior point of view, but wanted to think a bit about, wanted to share with you some of the works that I've done that kind of take me outside the studio, because I do think I've often tried to consider how particularly performance struggles to engage with the audience in a way that is not just standing there around the edges of a gallery space, or kind of is just an audience. So this was a first kind of attempt at trying to kind of work really on a large scale and collaboratively. This work is called Deux Chevaux. It was I first attempted it in 2011 in Northumberland, in the Northumberland countryside. And it's two horses that attempt to pull their own horsepower in the French Citroën Deux Chevaux 2CV car. For those who are technically correct, it's actually a 36 horsepower car, but it has this expression of the two horses, or chevaux vapeur, to steam horsepower car. But my interest was really in whether, first of all, that this was possible, because it was really an idea that came through thinking about how we subscribe to these ideas of language power. So I've been very always interested in things like candle power, horsepower, and how we kind of see those figures and think, well, what really is that, and how does that work in a kind of relational point of view, where as humans we always have to try to control and set up these situations to kind of function. Obviously, it's usually done to kind of practical means, but I was really interested to know how this could work. So I'm going to play a quick clip from how this went, which is with a mother and child horse pulling a Deux Chevaux car. And I think we've got sound this time, which will be nice. Sorry.
I'm going to try and pull the inside reins together, because that's what's makes them apart. So if I can have them short at it, just a little. Come on. Oh, up. Come on, Jeff. Jeff. You want me to lead those? Yeah, I think we're going to have to. Okay, and hook on. Hook on. Yeah,
Okay, so that taught me a lot, that piece, in terms of thinking about all those interrelations that could go with this performance, because the next thing I wanted to do was think about how I could bring this to an audience in the way that I could, maybe get some funding and try to kind of, think about the impacts of this. The piece, of course, started as thinking a lot as well about horse, labor, work, thinking a lot about how the sort of sensations of our relationship to the horse as a companion, but also as a work laborer, um, and how, as you saw in the video, they often wanted to go and maybe have a bite to eat in the hedge, and then they had to kind of gather the reins and kind of push them back into sort of motion. So of course, I'm sure they thought it was quite odd what I was trying to put together there. But I then applied to the Arts Council with this project and tried to perform it in London, going from Hyde Park all the way through Kensington, King's Road, and it was a day performance, and it was unbelievable how complicated it was to do this in London. I mean, only because I would have been willing to have taken my chances, except by the time I'd pinned myself down with the funding that was necessary to produce the project, I then had to get marshals, I had to get permissions, I had to get animal performance license, and I had to be checked that the horses went under pressure, that the car was not causing any distress, which I thought was totally correct and right. And then the correspondence of actually producing that project was about 3 or 4 months work, and that is it there on the put together. Let me go back to full screen. And yeah, it was quite an undertaking. It also totally transformed the nature of the work, bringing it to London, because of how so many things went out of control in the way that it became a kind of an attraction. It no longer became about the feelings of where I kind of began with the work, and I kind of had to accept that because of the environment of the city, and I wanted the work very much to sit without the art audience kind of necessarily framing it. I wanted it to be right out there in the street, surprising people, and it definitely did. And I will move on in a moment and show you a clip from the London viewing. But I just wanted to sort of mention about that again, that element of where I'm kind of trying to always through my work consider how when a project moves or how performance is situated, how important it is to consider where and how it's moving to and from. So what I mean exactly by that is that the notions that you might want to push through a work often get totally kind of overthrown by the conditioning of performance. So I felt that like the kind of freeness of the countryside, in a sense, was really for me where the essence of the work was, and that's where I would want it to return now. But at the time when I brought it to London 3 years later in 2014 from the original performance in 2011 in the countryside that I just showed you, I wanted to do this to kind of have visibility and see how it would respond in London. So in a way, it was very much about trying to work with the city, and again, this kind of idea of negotiation and the complications of that. So here is just a short clip from the London session. Sorry. Why is it doing that? Okay. 1 second. I'm just going to have to stop the video. Don't know why it's going in reverse. Okay. Just going to move on a bit just to. So yeah, that was the London version, and as I was saying, it kind of encompassed so much about the project, which was really about the bureaucracy of trying to produce that work and the um, kind of overwhelming amount of information that had to be processed in order to actually get the project on the road. Um, but it really kind of made me think again a lot about how I could work with trying to perform work in a kind of public domain and a public element. And a year later, with thanks to the Sculpture Shock Award and the Royal Society of Sculptors and Kensington Council, I was able to produce a piece called Gaps, Glitches and Speed Bumps, which was basically trying to see if a series of 4 singers could improvise the sound of a London bus in motion. So basically, I was trying to see if they could harmonize through their bodies, through the sensation of movement, a score completely based in the moment. And what I really liked about the bus and the top deck of the bus was trying to actually turn this space into a kind of ever-changing auditorium where there would be people who were coming to the project, but there would be people who were also just standard kind of just on their journeys. And this was a piece that, this is where it travelled from Hammersmith to Aldwych every day for 5 days, 6 hours a day. And the little green, basically the work so that people could actually navigate and find the performance, I had friend who was tweeting all the time our position on board, so that basically people could find the project at a destination or a space. So someone could travel across London and pop out at Green Park in time to get on the bus and take it to Hammersmith, or people could go on their lunch break. So Twitter became this way to mobilize audiences into this project in a way that I didn't expect it actually could work so well, but it did. And the Twitter feed in itself became something of interest. I kind of was curious about some of the things that popped up, like young child lulled to sleep as we disembark at the Royal Albert Hall, leather trousers, root beer and tattoos on the number 9 bus. And it was this kind of quantity of stuff that was always going on. The piece was also became an entire body of work in the way that moving on, thinking about how Do Chevaux was kind of a relationship to movement and the body, I kind of really wanted to think about how we kind of move in the city, and for me the bus as a traveling space kind of for me encompassed everything about where the right place where to situate this project, not on a kind of private hire bus, but inside a public bus. And for those who may be interested to research a bit more into this, and in terms of the kind of theory, I was kind of very into Nina Power's writing on find it. That's not here now. But anyway, she wrote a lot about automation and basically how the female voice has a kind of subduing effect on the passengers rather than a male voice. And I was very interested in how the singers kind of interacted with the whole mechanics of travel. So I'm going to show you a short clip from that. And while I'm showing you the clip, I'll find the text that she wrote, a clip from that. Okay. So yeah, it's just a clip from the documentation from the piece, and throughout the sound performance, I was also making these series of line drawings. I kind of thought of them a little bit like automatic drawings, in the sense that I would begin with the pen at the center of this target, which is actually reformed from musical score sheet paper into a spherical form, and to think about how the pen would kind of run off the page and into the page, and they became a series of drawings. There was quite a lot of sort of build up in terms of actually trying to have the singers, in a sense, tuned into the space, because of course, like just going into a bus is quite a quite a frightening experience to then start trying to harmonize an opera or a sound piece. So I had a kind of 3-month residency in advance of that performance work where I actually constructed a kind of mock-up bus situation where I had subwoofer speakers inside the chairs here, which kind of they felt through their bodies, a video playing of the sort of scene from the top deck of a bus, and many contingency plans about how we would deal with kind of interaction. I mean, most of the time, actually, it was kind of interesting to see how people would, first of all, hear the sound beginning and playing and wondering what it was. And then they could notice their own bodies moving in relation to the sound. And they could start to understand that the whole piece was actually trying to consider about this kind of intervention with their own bodies and all collectively moving at the same time. And I felt like that. I know it had the potential to rub people the wrong way and invade privacy, but I really wanted to sort of put this piece there in quite a delicate way, I feel, because sometimes it was very subtle. The sound and the volume always changed in relation to the speed and the traffic flow that was experienced throughout the piece. And yeah, I think, moving on from that, I kind of thought a lot about how the body kind of moved in relation to sound. And so I've got this picture from a festival where I started thinking about the closeness of proximity. It's interesting thinking about this now in relation to the coronavirus, of course, but this kind of intensity of being packed into a group of people, and that feeling of sound and light and going through the body. And kind of on the backdrop of all those pieces about kind of touch and nervousness, I've kind of tried to unravel from the dying of fluorescent light to the breaking of dance to Deux Chevaux to gaps, glitches and speed bumps. I started thinking again about some of my earlier, where I sort of started in terms of an educational situation, I guess you'd call it. And that was at Chelsea College of Art back in 2002. Painting, of which I stopped painting kind of a year in to the course. And that was partly due to the fact that I couldn't really find a way that painting was kind of fulfilling what I wanted to do. I mean, I just found I couldn't really achieve with paint at that moment what I wanted, or it felt out of sync with the kind of possibilities of a more photographic based language that I feel like most of my work has come out of, a kind of more indexical value, a sort of a kind of nurturing of imagery. I would say that, kind of going back even to the fluorescent light, there's a sense of how things, I'm kind of setting situations up and allowing them to unfold, but within a very kind of fairly strict framework, in the way that there's an outer framework which is quite strict, and then the kind of inside which is quite loose, and I kind of feel that plays off each other. I kind of try to work with that friction throughout most of my work. For example, if you look at the hold music earlier, the sound itself is there, but then it's kind of just that little hole in the wall that kind of gives you a sense of where you are in that, which is for me a kind of just a gaping space. So kind of coming back to this image with the concert, it was the first time that I kind of saw mouths speaking in a way that I felt I could trace something from that. And that was when I made this work, which was when I started applying lipstick that I saw in in the festival, every different colours of lipstick, and I started to speak with lipstick onto paper as a way to try to think about a way of tracking language, a way of kind of turning things into a score. So this was actually, I wrote this piece is called Artist Biography, and it was the first attempt at trying to use lipstick on paper. And it was really trying to kind of encapsulate the difficulties for me about writing an artist statement. So I decided to mouth it into paper, and each dark area kind of represents a sort of following of the kind of format of punctuation or grammar, in the way that you would end a sentence, and then when I ended a sentence, I would reapply the lipstick and let it fade out again, in the same way that one would kind of allow breath to pass through the body to then take in another breath to begin another sentence. So I kind of wanted to think about language in that way with these pieces. And I kind of went on to think about how that could become a way for me to not just reconsider paint, because of course lipstick, you could call lipstick many different things. Lipstick has this, there's so many aspects to this piece that I want to go into that would need more time, because I think this whole body of work could have a session in itself if there was interest. But I do feel like it encapsulates for me two things. It was like, for me, the first time I could return to painting in a way that I felt like it meant something to me, and it encapsulated a kind of Mackrell or hieroglyphics for me, in a sense, like this could then become my way of speaking to people and a way of trying to get back to the idea as well of kind of moving out of the judgment of language, because I always felt like the construction of language has become so complex. This is especially thinking about emojis, symbols, how we mix technology with literature and poetry and language, that I kind of wanted to take that right back to the touch of the skin on paper. And I developed that into many different pieces, sometimes using white lipstick on black card, because I kind of like the X-ray kind of anatomical feel that white lipstick gave on black. And this was actually taking a Edward Snowden leaked document and transferring each word for word onto card. Just give a bit more of a close up of the detail of the mouths and each space. And yeah, I feel like there is a score element to them, I feel, and it's very much for me about trying to create a sort of new framework for feeling, because I try to work with feeling a lot of the time in my work, and I ended up doing a whole series with red, which was kind of about the reddening of skin and blotchiness, the sort of feeling of when one is embarrassed or has senses of desire, feelings of kind of the fleshiness of the body. And so I mouth these pieces instead of actually here of speaking them. I actually just kind of opened, closed my mouth, and dragged myself across the paper. I actually normally do these works on the floor, and kind of just rotate my body until my neck is kind of almost cracking off on the edge, a little bit like a chicken, I guess. This is a bit more of a detail of these pieces. And this one is just an installation shot to kind of show you the scale, which was shown last year at my show called Here Is Where We Meet at Gallery Krinzinger in Vienna. It's a gallery I work with. And this piece called Flush, which was the sort of sense of when the skin, when the head kind of fills, kind of gets giddy. I kind of then also wanted to think about that anatomical sense of language, moving out of just being a sort of strict trace of words, but into how these kind of pieces came out of a sort of rage. This actually first piece made last summer, which was when Boris Johnson tried to prorogue Parliament, and I was just thinking about a line from his diary where he was meeting somebody who was financing one of his projects, and he didn't want them to know who it was, so he called it Tea with a Tourist. And I was kind of thinking a lot about how words and body and sort of this behavior with language is just completely sort of twisting into something kind of primal, kind of really animalistic. And so I really wanted these pieces to develop in a kind of more animal environment. And this one's called Hellhound and Her Savages. And again, I'm just trying to think about how these kind of two bodies are kind of alluring to each other, chasing each other, kind of pouncing on each other through speech. Yeah, and I've just got one final thing to end with because I know that I'm not quite sure how long have I been going on for. Sorry, Susie. I'll just wrap this up very quickly, but I hope I. Yeah.
Yeah.
How
Well,
long is that?
it's been about an hour. But yeah,
Oh
I've
God.
got one more thing.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, we'll do one quick wrap up. Well, just to kind of finalize with this piece, just kind of show a picture from my residency last autumn with Launchpad, and it was arriving into the south of France where the sunflower fields have just been kind of decimated. Not decimated in the way that they are being cropped and pruned back for the regrowth and replenishment, but I was interested in having not witnessed the sort of sunflower fields that close up, and I kind of started thinking about the sunflowers as bodies, as language, and it's kind of something I wanted to share because it's a new body of work that I'm currently working on, which is with the kind of circadian rhythms of sunflowers and how, in a way, for me, they kind of had a strange sort of connection back to the fluorescent light at the very beginning of this presentation because of the way that they glow, the way that they need light, the way that they are basically governed by light. And I was thinking about how each sunflower kind of had its own sort of characteristic behavior. And I'm currently been working with kind of solarizing these sunflowers onto photographic paper, and then I'm working with diaries that I'm inscribing into the photographic paper, and it's just a close-up detail to show you a little bit more what is going on in that image, because I know that's quite hard to see from far away. And yeah, that's kind of it. I hope it hasn't. Sorry, this whole kind of it's took me a bit getting used to. Like, I usually like being able to see people and like in a crowd and hear them, because I'm like thinking, oh my God, how are they not thinking I'm too like going on too much? Anyway, so that's that, and thank you for listening. Yeah.
So much.
No, just if you can stop sharing your screen, then we'll be in
yeah.
you so that you'll be able to see
Okay.
everyone. Thank you so much. That should help.
How do I?
Just at the top. Yes.
Oh yeah. Stop
It should
sharing.
now go to galleries.
Okay.
Yes. There we
Great.
go. I can see people.
Hello.
Thanks so much, Will. That was amazing. So much work. It's incredible.
Sorry.
Any questions?
Sorry. Yes, please. Yeah.
Blown away. It's just amazing. Yeah. Anyone got any questions?
I'll kick off.
Yeah.
Personally, Will, I think that you're probably one of the most relevant and important artists of our time. I have done since I've known you. And I'd like to know, because all of your responses to your certain particular field of interest are always so elegant. How would you, if you thought about it, think about a response with regards to COVID? Because I think that all of us as visual practitioners think about this on a day-to-day. How can we suggest our visual language to make some difference in the world, but with an individual like you that does so sensitively make responses to the environment? I mean, how would you do so?
It's a really tricky one because I feel like it's something that we're still learning. I mean, you know, this whole kind of even the interaction now of trying to speak through this situation is already for me like making me want to do a whole new series on embarrassed lipstick pieces. But I kind of, I guess I think well, the two things. I guess like I'm still able. I can walk to my studio, for example. I've shared the time with the other people I share with, so we kind of go in 2 or 3 days each a week. Um, so when I've been in there the last sort of 7, 8 weeks, because I haven't really been able to, haven't generally had to stop going there that much, apart from once I kind of helped out some family that were a bit stuck and things like that. But I was thinking we are generally quite isolated people. I think I mean it kind of depends on your practice completely because I know a lot of people work collaboratively all the time. Sometimes the residency I went on in the autumn, one artist had been on residencies for 2 years non-stop. You know, she's just been moving from one to another. But I think the coronavirus situation has really made us think uh, about what we need, which is not so much in the everyday. I mean, of course, we want to do well, maybe to let's say we want to live from our artwork environments rather than the other things that we have to do. I think that I think we are even starting to see that a little bit in how people are valuing listening more because I think you know we've a lot of people have not had the time or space to. I mean, I'm talking about the general environment in terms of how the hamster wheel is just so well oiled that we have to run even to get onto it. We don't even have to start it. You know. I mean, in the way that you get onto the Victoria line at 8 in the morning, you just have to keep moving. You know, I mean, if I go with my 85-year-old dad, I can't go at that time of day because he'll just be flattened. There will be no sense of kind of you know you know So I think everyone's had a chance now to kind of find something in themselves. You know, whether that's more garden, home-based style. I hear a lot more mowing the lawn than I used to from the window. There's kind of like a real pushing of the lawnmower. So I just kind of think that I think people have, what I'll try and get back to is people have tried to, I think people are trying to delve into that space, which is difficult. I mean, it is difficult um, to take the time to look at what occupies your mind and clear it out. I mean, decluttering, I think, this has been a really good time. Whether you're an artist who makes a lot of work or whether you, um, yeah, sorry, didn't really answer very well, but I guess in a nutshell, I think um, it's about trying to hear yourself breathe. There's a Marina Abramovich video which I quite like where she just like picks up a glass of water and like she takes you through every step of like the feeling of the water on the lips, how the water goes down through the throat. She does it in, of course, a very sort of, overly sort of stereotyped way in terms of how the emotion is. But I do think like even those kind of steps, like we can now take the time to listen to how we consume, how we open the window. Yeah, I just feel like it's a chance to look at things in more detail, and I think we often don't have the time to do that, or we didn't in the past.
Absolutely.
Bit glitchy. I hope you're still there. What's going on?
Any other questions from anyone else?
It's all frozen. Okay. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay there, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was wondering if you were going to make any sort of work in response to those sort of liminal spaces, because I think what I found really fascinating about your work was that dealing with the liminal sort of spaces and in between moments of mindfulness that before we'd normally maybe find quite infuriating if we're like waiting on hold on the phone, but it's almost as if now, like we've sort of adjusted after a few weeks. Even about queuing at the supermarket, I kind of enjoy sort of just having a bit of time where I'm focused on something and not queuing for the supermarket, but the sort of mindfulness set in that zone. I think that's what you sort of touched upon. But I was wondering if you sort of thought you'd be making work about that in the future, because I thought that was the sort of work where you dealt with the sleep,
I think
and
so.
I found that really interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think even kind of going back as well to the fluorescent light, I feel like there's a sense of how that temporality, that nervousness, kind of is still a benchmark. I mean, I mean, maybe it's kind of fallen into a fortunate time that could rest on that, because I feel like all of these things about being stuck on hold, fluorescent light that are dying, which I meant to mention earlier as well, that the whole kind of currency of that is very curious. You know, recycling a fluorescent light costs £3 at the recycling centre for a business, so I get fluorescent lights sent to me from like studios across London. I guess I'm curious about. I guess I am really, I am thinking a lot about the sounds that now come through in a space of silence, and especially now with the COVID situation. Particularly maybe as well in the last piece with the sunflowers and these text pieces. I'm kind of interested in also diaries, kind of infiltrating images that I'm working on. And these kind of delicate bodies. I've kind of, I kind of got quite interested in how the sunflower is this kind of has this historical romantic position in painting and in iconography. But I was amazed at how they each form their own personal characteristic. And as you say about the queuing, I kind of see a series of flowers, but I do see. I guess I don't want it always to be an end. Like going back to the fluorescent light thing, I think something I would pick up on now with the COVID-19 is a sense of nurturing, and how collectivity can do better. Because, for example, when those fluorescent lights are in the gallery, they die out, but they're replenished by the gallery with more flickering fluorescent lights. So there's a kind of sense of care that is taken with the work. So I guess I will be thinking more about how pieces are collectively maintained through kind of participation. But it's a really tricky one because it takes me so long to to work things out, kind of digest things, that I still feel like, are we going to end up in a situation of going back to everything as it is? I know a lot of people want that. I think we have to try to not, as I'm sure many of you do think, like we've got to try to think differently. Though I don't really like webinars. I hope that's not the future of talks. Anyway, yeah, sorry, that's it. I'll get better at that. But yeah.
May I
I
ask?
can see somebody says there is. They're just called students. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, go on. Sorry, Sam. Yeah.
I didn't realise there was a question.
Sorry, there's some kind of delay. No, it's fine. Please.
Oh, okay. No, it's only because when you mentioned Edward Snowden.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Why? Sorry, it broke up again.
No, not why.
The headphones back on. Don't know if that would help.
I mean,
Sorry.
no, it's fine. Honestly, it's cool. No, I'm just interested with the piece with regards to Edward Snowden.
Sorry. Hi, Sam. Yeah, I couldn't hear what you said. Yeah.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I was wondering with Edward Snowden, with regards to the
Sorry, I
speech.
didn't hear the.
Yeah,
No, please. Yeah.
I think there's a lag. John Kipps is laughing here.
Maybe you can type it in the chat, Sam. Your
Yes.
question.
Okay.
Oh,
God,
oh,
that's not going to be great with my dyslexia. Okay, so hey, matey. Why am I even putting matey? Okay, so hey, so Edward Snowden. I don't know how to spell Edward for a start.
Okay, Sam, tell me. I'll type it.
Okay, thank you. So Edward Snowden,
Yes.
sort of being the whistleblower of with regards to the United States of America. What was the speech that he was interpreting? As in, Will, what's the speech with regards to the speech?
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Is that
I
better?
can.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's a document called Well, it's a document about the US and UK surveillance of China databases, and it's basically about how US and UK secret operations was trying to hack into something called the root of trust. So basically, the root of trust, as I understand it, is the language that a computer identifies with for agreeing or not agreeing to your being allowed through various hoops to get through passwords and whether your authentication. And basically, the US and UK collaborated on a program of circumnavigating the characteristics that Chinese computer systems wanted in order to gain access to private information. And it's interesting because you can download all of these documents. And of course, every time you do, it says, you may be violating US law, etc. But of course, it's all been made public in about 2013 or 14. And I guess I was interested in how, in particularly in why that piece, not just because of the secrecy of the information, but because I think we've all, if you haven't read any of these, which obviously many of us, I hadn't read any of them really until that recently, but I was really interested in how significant they are and
Really?
how much by reading them or knowing that they exist, we didn't seem to care that much. So I just thought by putting them into kind of mouthed, almost kind of like fish, kind of like a cabinet of words. I thought it might help. I thought it might kind of draw attention to the nature of what it was.
The importance.
And as I Yes, yeah, and in this kind of forensical sensation of of the lipstick, I kind of felt like the white was like a kind of almost like a brushing off on like an archaeological dig, um, or like a kind of murder scene or something, kind of. So, but yeah, I kind of that was I might do would like to do a whole room of those kind of. uh,
What's your
yeah.
thoughts on Julian Assange?
It's complicated. I don't know. I mean, one moment he's got Pamela Anderson at his at his place. I do think he has been. Of course, I do think he has been set up very badly, but I also do think he has got stuff to hide. I think there's a mixed bag there.
Mm.
I would certainly, from what I understand from the rape trial, and I don't think he's exactly a saintly person. But at the same time, I do think that I do think that he should be allowed to have a fair trial, but I know he'll never get that. It just would be too significant. But I do think that the likes of him and Edward Snowden have kind of set a kind of early platform for probably more people that will come out in the future. I mean, you can just imagine the amount of information that could appear from a current Tory government. I mean, the amount of deceit that has gone into it on a daily basis. But of course, how it's also been manicured. It's incredible.
It really is.
I don't know. It will be interesting to see if it's possible to overcome the kind of labyrinth of connectivity between finance, media, political power. It's just so strong now here. I just can't see it being disrupted for a very long time. But let's see. But I do think there's always another day, you know, and I do think art. I don't know. I mean, something I would like to mention earlier is I do think music has more of a chance. Like I do think, for example, Stormzy's performance, where he kind of mentioned Theresa May and they kind of had the water pouring down on his head after that sort of situation of Grenfell, spoke so much about the illness of politics today. And I find that I'm often looking at that kind of performance rather than art performance to kind of talk about these situations. I don't know. I think art has a role, but it's difficult. I just think music and captures people in a totally different way. But
Absolutely.
but yeah, thank you and thanks for listening. And yeah, if there's anyone's got any questions, I'm sorry I went through a few pieces probably without really detailing them as well as I would have liked. But I'm always happy to as well take questions later. Like if anyone wants to send me anything, please do feel free.
Well, at this point, shall we, as we always do, give William Mackrell a massive round of applause?
Cool. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you.